Welcome back to another episode of the KJP Show, where we celebrate and elevate indie games. As always, I'm your host, Kurosh, and today we're going to go over last month's news. The big news today, game announcements, Summer Games Fest, and everything under the sun that fell under there. In June, we got all of the different companies and organizations that do major game announcements coming out of the woodworks with the mid-year kind of evaluation, and what typically takes place around E3, which we no longer have, now takes place and got kicked off by Jeff Keighley's Summer Games Fest. And it didn't stop there. It went into Summer Games Fest. We got Xbox showcasing a lot of their stuff, and Nintendo also following suit, along with every larger publisher and every major space as well, kind of covering that. And so what are these like mid-year announcements? For those that know, E3 used to be typically the space which you would wait every year. That was where everyone would get together and you would see Nintendo, Xbox, Ubisoft, Square Enix, all of these major companies bringing in like all their trailers and announcements for the coming few months to the coming few years, showcasing, previewing, announcing major stuff, consoles, everything. So with E3 having died out in the last year or two, Jeff Keighley has now taken the spot and kind of used it as like a middle platform before the Game Awards at the end of the year, and started the summer off with Summer Games Fest, which had this big kickoff kind of event that was about 1 to 2 hours, and then following suit was each company kind of doing their own thing as well. So like I said, Xbox, Nintendo, and a few and other publishers and spaces were getting a chance to use that same time that everyone typically expects, but doing it on their own ways. So Steam, for instance, would showcase Steam Next Fest, where you'd see a lot of demos being showcased of a variety of games. Nintendo does their Nintendo Directs. Xbox does their Xbox Showcase, now all largely digital, sometimes with a local audience with Xbox and Summer Games Fest. And the showing wasn't anything to scoff at. Summer Games Fest alone had over about, I think, 40 or so games showcased. As did Xbox, having a lot of games under the sun showcased. And I don't necessarily want to go over nitpick one at a time, but it's more so just the general conversation of game announcements mid-year, what took place, what happened. One thing of note that I'd like to hit on was how this whole summer kicked off with Summer Games Fest. The item I really want to talk about with how Summer Games Fest kicked off that caught my eye personally was how the opening kind of speech and stuff that Jeff Keighley started with. He started things off by finally, kind of from his perspective and in a public space, addressing the turmoil and the volatility of the gaming space right now with game developers. A lot of major companies this year alone have had major layoffs, either due to acquisitions or just sustainability or financial, numerous reasons that come to case. But it has all been at the cost of the game developers losing jobs, getting relocated, getting abruptly let go. And it's just been hard to enjoy games knowing that it's not being, the developers aren't getting their comeuppance or their recognition in those places. Games such as Hi-Fi Rush and numerous other ones, they performed amazingly. They were awarded amazingly. And they were, that studio was acquired by Microsoft, earlier this year, we saw them their studio get completely shut down. And that was part of the Microsoft acquisitions that took place. But this has been going throughout other studios. To finally hear someone on a platform like where Jeff Keighley's at speak about it in some manner and shape was something I took note of. I can put a little snippet, or I can link it here, but I thought what he shared could have been more. I definitely did appreciate it though, because I did feel like he did put a focus on giving the public eye in this space much needed attention on the developers and on supporting them, whether they be on major studios or in their independent endeavors. And a lot of what the Summer Games Fest kickoff showcased was largely indie endeavors. There was a few big games being announced there, but there was a lot of games that were ones that would typically be covered on a channel like this or on areas that you don't see on as large a space. And so I liked that was at least an element of that kickoff. And this may, for the larger audiences, it's not something that they typically are in for, because they want to see, when you go to a Game Awards or when you go to a larger E3, the expectation is for the general public, this is gearing towards things that appeal to larger audiences. So you're looking for the Fortnites, the Call of Duties, the name brands and the IPs that everyone knows. But if you look at the history, I think there's a conversation to be had about how so many amazing indie games have broken through that. Like you look at Stardew Valley alone, that's an example of that. Hollow Knight. These are, I mean, obviously the big successes, but for every one big success, there are thousands upon thousands of indie games that are, making their efforts and attempts that don't get that spotlight. And there could be the next one of those hidden around somewhere amongst them that no one's even seeing or realizing. So to see some of that being shed here, and to me, the fact that there's so many different showcases being put out is a nice thing where it offers more opportunities for that presentation, for showcasing the variety of games, where Xbox this year really showcased a lot of their big IPs that they had. They had Perfect Dark, they had Gears of War, they had all these other properties that they had, the Indiana Jones. And it's great to see them. It's great to see that be present as well. But the full spectrum of it is this gaming space is much larger and much wider diversity now. So having multiple spaces for that in showcases, I think makes for a better, just everyone all together being aware of it. Finding ways in which to be effective in that is an ongoing challenge, I think. Now, again, I mentioned Xbox was talking a lot about their big IPs. I think it definitely garnered them a lot of positive light with a lot that's been going on with them, given, as I mentioned, the layoffs that have been occurring within their acquisitions and everything. I'm very curious, and I'm still very skeptical until we actually see these games. Hearing previews is always optimistic and something that I'm always interested in, but their showcases to me tend to, and this is just from an outsider looking in, they show these games, but more often than not, I see these games just presented there, but then they become available elsewhere. And so it's never really, while I appreciate the games, I never really have a strong connection between the game and the Xbox brand or console space. It's never gotten me to the point where I'm compelled to get into Xbox hardware exclusively. And unfortunately, there is a bit of that exclusivity to it, but something about what they do, like the Game Pass aspect and all these other things, I think they need to make a stronger argument for some of it, and they're trying here. So I'm curious to see how it falls through and proceeds as it goes forward into the second half of this year. And the other showcase I really wanted to touch light on here and spend a little bit of time is Nintendo's Direct. They went out ahead of time and announced that it will not be covering the upcoming Switch successor, whatever that may be called. I'm personally vying for the Super Switch or Super Nintendo Switch or something like that, to kind of go off of the NES and then the Super NES. I think something like that would be an interesting evolution, but that's just me. Curious, what would you want the Switch 2 to be called? But they went ahead with their announcing of the Direct, saying that they will not be talking about that. So a lot of speculation and hype obviously takes place when it comes to Nintendo and the IPs that people dream that they get announced and everything. And they kind of were a little bit in a lot of different directions, a lot of positive directions. I think overall they had a good showcase. The areas that surprised me were all in positive surprises. People were hoping and expecting something of Metroid Prime 4, and we did get that, thankfully. So it is real. It is something that has been worked on, which is great, because I know that has restarted and kind of started from the ground up again since last we had heard. But seeing the new Zelda game, Echoes of Wisdom, was a really positive thing in my eyes. Of now we get to play a game from the perspective of Zelda in an art with a team that has proven themselves with the remake of Link's Awakening and taking into a new storyline. I was originally thinking they were going to do another remake with that team, and I'm glad they're not. I'm glad they're getting a chance to kind of like test their creativity and work within the larger Zelda space and try new grounds with it. So I'm very excited for that, and it's releasing this year, which is going to be a fantastic new Switch game. The other one being the Mario and Luigi franchise. Mario RPGs are getting served up left and right. We had Super Mario RPG getting remade last year. We had Paper Mario Remake coming out earlier this year, and now we're going to get Mario and Luigi Brothership, a new a sequel in the Mario and Luigi RPG kind of franchise that they've been running or sub-franchise, I should say, which I've loved since the Game Boy Advance days. It kind of felt like it captured a lot of the essence of Super Mario RPG, and going with a new kind of just a new twist to it. And I feel like they very much made it its own thing. I'm curious about how much of that original team or teams is part of this new one, but I'm still very excited from what they've showcased. And honestly, the biggest announcement, and this is more of a personal thing, but I know a lot of people on the internet, and especially the fighting game community, would agree, this was a wild kind of out of nowhere turn with the announcement of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 coming to a collector's edition, or coming back into a release space. And it came out of nowhere. It was like in between two things, casually in the middle, nonchalantly just announced. Not only on Switch, it was announced at the Switch Showcase. It's on every other platform except for Xbox, which was an interesting thing to note. I believe probably because of the characters and the IP involved and how they're tied to Sony, possibly. So it's on PlayStation, it's on PC, it's on Switch, but not Xbox. But they're coming out with this Marvel Capcom collection, and Marvel vs. Capcom 2 being part of it was huge. It was one of my highest announcements made at that showcase. So I'm excited to hear what people think of it. I'm curious to see how it performs, how it is. It will have online capabilities, but it's interesting to see these announcements being made in the cadence in which they're presented. I'm wondering how much they were aware or not aware of how big a news that was and where they placed it, because it was very cool to see the reactions be kind of caught off guard. And I'm always curious on the inside baseball of it, of like how much were they planning for that or hoping for that, as opposed to like building it up to be this big kind of one more thing, which they tend to do for things that they know that are going to be exciting ones. And so that's largely the news for the month. I think the big thing I want to kind of like look at is now we're halfway through 2024, and we've seen a lot of great games coming out earlier this year, but you always can, from my perspective, and just looking at a larger gaming landscape, you see the big games, kind of the titans and everything coming out, and there's always an ebb and flow of it, to me it seems, where you'll see one year where it's just like everything got released. You got like God of War, Breath of the Wild, Red Dead, all these different games coming out, and then the next year it almost feels like a little bit of a calm, and obviously so, because there's ebbs and flows to game development. The games are much larger now, they're more involved, more complex on that scale, and it takes more time to develop games like that of quality, and putting the time and energy needed to properly develop and create them in enjoyable fashion so that they're enjoyable for the players. But it is interesting in that, like, it's not so much an off year or anything. I think it's more so that ebb and flow of what a gamer can expect every year, where there's an expectation of like, well, I need my fix this year. And I think I often find myself comparing that to the movie industry. And you see every year, it's like, okay, summer blockbusters, at least it used to be summer blockbusters, or for instance, the MCU, like what are the big titles that are coming out that year for film? And then you look at there's always like an expectation of certain slots getting filled for that. And I feel like there are similarities and there are differences with the gaming industry from what is actually happening versus that expectation. I feel like gamers do to some degree have that. And I'm wondering if that is contributing to the lack of sustainability, is contributing to this unrealistic expectation that it isn't a movie, it isn't a 2-hour, 3-hour experience. It's much more. It's expected to, when a game like Helldivers does so well at its launch, but doesn't go past 2 or 3 months, is it still now in hindsight, now looking at it this far out, do people look at it as a success it was? I still do, because it did so much and it's still amazing and they've done so much, but because of the expectation for it to be a Fortnite, for it to be a Call of Duty, when it's not, or when you compare it to a Suicide Squad where it was expected to do that and it just fell flat at the initial launch, that kind of, what does time do to the perspective of these games too? There's a lot of thoughts that come to me with it, but I'm very interested to see what the second half of this year looks like with this in mind, with certain, and that's just in the games. Then you look at the consoles and the hardware and where the landscape is just shifting. We see next year, we're already hearing, for instance, of Switch 2, there is talks of, I think Phil Spencer mentioned for Xbox, they're thinking about mobile hardware and what they would like out of it from an Xbox like proprietary like tools and stuff, and what they enjoy from it. So what do these all mean? Does any of it change the way in which games work, or the way in which game developers need to start preparing? Are we veering more, myself included, like towards a more mobile space of like portability is the big factor that they want to aim at and go for? Because to me, that's a big market. Like when you can make your game Steam Deck verified or playable portably or on Switch, some people wait for that. And so what does it hold? I'm curious. I'm curious to see what viewers think, what fans think, and where the landscape and the community in general go forward with. Now let's shift gears and go into a bit of what's coming out, or what has already come out in the month of July. The first game on the list is Bo, Path of the Teal Lotus. This game is set to release July 17th on most platforms, I believe, across everything, and it is developed by Squid Shack Studios. This game is interesting because when I first saw it, I very much got feelings of Hollow Knight. It is a Metroidvania-style game set in Japanese folklore, and you're following this little critter that it has a mysticism and a fantasy to it, but it also blends that in with that Metroidvania-style gameplay. So if you're into either of those, I highly recommend checking it out, wishlisting it, and letting me know what you think, because I'm definitely going to be grabbing that and giving it a shot. The second game that is coming out this month in July 18th is a game I've talked about on a few occasions. That game is Dungeons of Hinterberg. If you haven't heard me talk about it, I recommend you check out my impressions of it, but it is a game where you take the place of this character who's going on a vacation into these mountains in Austria, in this kind of like little town where you can go on these little magical explorations in these dungeons and do a bit of dungeon exploration, social sim in the town, and a lot of fun action in between. Again, highly recommend checking it out. It's coming out in July 18th, so check it out, take a look. There's a demo on Steam, so worth checking out for sure. And last of games that I'd like to point out is a game I had a chance to try at Steam Next Fest. It was a demo available. It's called Arranger, a role puzzling adventure. This game is developed by Furniture and Mattress LLC. It is an interesting game because it kind of takes, if you're familiar, if you've seen the trailer, if you're checking out some of the footage I'm showing right now, the art might look familiar. The artist involved is the artist that made the game Braid. And so they're involved with the other developers on this project to make an amazing game about this kind of self-discovery for this character, Gemma, as she's puzzling through, and it's kind of mixes a blend of that narrative storytelling with puzzle solving as you kind of shift the tiles on this grid to get through various puzzles. The demo was very intriguing. I definitely want to spend some more time with it. We'll definitely be talking about it more on this channel, so keep an eye out. And it comes out on July 25th. So keep an eye out, check it out. And if you get a chance there, if you have any thoughts on any of the games I've mentioned or any others that you think you're excited for, I'd love to hear what those are and what you're looking forward to playing in the month of July. And that is a wrap for today's episode. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this bit of news that I've shared today and any of these games that I've talked about. I'd love to hear what you think about any of the topics we discussed, any of the news I've shared, and any of these games. Let me know what you think. What games are you looking forward to this month? What games are you looking forward to the rest of this year with all these games announced from the Summer Games Fest, the Nintendos, and everything? Keep in touch. Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Have a great day, and until next time, I'll see you.